When I discovered marijuana, I kind of likened it like the hand of God came down and said, "You are loved." And it opened up my world, and my grades improved, my parents improved, it lifted my depression. I got into a good college, I had great friends.
This is true for me too. It's like it did work for a while.
Today, we have Peter Lear, a social worker and addictions counselor based in Boulder, Colorado,
who has spent decades working closely with men across generations.
You work with a lot of Gen Z men. What do they struggle with?
There's a lot of skepticism about men. A lot of them are not setting a good example for online dating, video games, social media. The business model is let's get them addicted, and it works.
It's very, very sneaky.
Struggling with technology, struggling with authentic interpersonal connection is difficult. None of my friends went to therapy. There were barely even mental health issues back then. Nobody took medicines. Nobody saw a psychiatrist that I knew of, certainly.
Peter Lear shares why many men today are missing out on the support they need.
This addiction is more insidious. It's not the sledgehammer like crack or alcohol or heroin that will just completely mess up your life. It's slow and it's insidious, and it can have a big effect.
What signs a parent should look for when it's time to make a forceful change in your kid's life? How would your parents talk to their kids about drug use? Hello, welcome back to the Men's Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Azoulay, and I'm here with Peter Lear. He's a social worker and addictions counselor out of Boulder, Colorado, and he's been working with men for a long time. We're going to talk about today is a really important topic, which I feel like doesn't get nearly enough airtime, and it's the importance of mentorship and, more importantly, connecting Gen Z men with the older generation. So, Peter, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mark. It's good to be here.
Yeah, so I would like to start with a personal story. What got you into doing this work?
I had some issues growing up, came from a family with a fair bit of dysfunction, and fortunately, my mom understood the value of counseling and got me a therapist when I was 15 years old, a man named Dave Lindgren. And it was revelatory for me. It was a big benefit. And I had kind of a dearth of positive male role models in my life. Two fathers who struggle with addiction and abandonment and some abuse in there. So, yeah, it was really very beneficial thing for me to get connected to this therapist who I just remember kind of being 15 and looking at this guy and going, what's his angle? Why is he interested in what I have to think and say and feel? That was a big one. That kind of started my journey. And then a couple other good therapists and clinical social workers really made a big difference in my life.
Yeah. I want to dig in on that point you were bringing up around, a teen's experience in therapy, and that kind of, like you said, that I don't want to call it cynicism or doubt or lack of trust. Can you speak to that? Maybe what it was like for you and also what you see in the clients that you work with?
Yeah. I mean, I think rightly so. There's a lot of skepticism about men in general. We look at the top kind of echelons of the power structure, the apex males. A lot of them are not setting a good example. And I certainly having grown up in sort of an affluent neighborhood, men worked and they made money. And as long as they did that, they were fulfilling their obligations. And so, yeah, I think there's just a lot of skepticism about males in general. And a lot of times when they come in, there's gonna kind of that angle of when I was a kid, what's your motive here? Like, what kind of lectures are you going to give me? How are you going to tell me how it is and how I need to buck up? And which is sort of the repertoire of my father's, lectures and punishments. And the feeling, nurturing, empathic, understanding male was definitely an outlier until I got connected to therapy.
Yeah, you talk about that distrust. What did you think the therapist angle was? Or was it just so alien that you had no idea of what even kind of conversation you're about to have with this dude?
Yeah, it was, this was back in the early 80s. And none of my friends went to therapy. There were barely even mental health issues back then. Nobody took medicines. Nobody saw a psychiatrist that I knew of, certainly. Had an open mind. And I was like, let's give it a try. But yeah, I certainly went in with some skepticism and was ready for the life lecture on how I wasn't doing things right.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. I know you work with a lot of Gen Z men, and I'm wondering, what do they struggle with? Because I think for a lot of the older generation, we look at them and they seem very foreign to us. I think it's hard to understand, especially when it comes to things like gender expression or their, career choice of many of them wanting to be, social media influencers or things like that. It can be difficult to relate to. So I'm curious, like, what are they struggling with in general?
I think a number of things. Certainly, social media is generally pretty toxic. The algorithm is, let's get this guy hooked. The business model is basically for online dating, video games, social media, and on and on. The business model is, let's get them addicted. And it works many times, sadly. And so I think struggling with technology, struggling with authentic interpersonal connection is difficult. One client I just worked with, like, how to have a phone conversation with. Like, he was terrified of how to have a phone conversation, or how to ask out a girl in person and not just, a hookup on Hinge or Tinder or what have you. I think video games is a big one. And I also think marijuana, cannabis use is very toxic. I mean, I'm for legalization, but I think there needs to be some sort of governors on just the percentage of THC that one can sell. I mean, you can be vaping 90% THC, and these kids they just hold these pens and go into the bathroom, and they just get completely blotto all day long, and they're rendered completely useless by the end of the day, and they can't learn at all. So I think those are some of the concerns that I've seen.
Yeah, I mean the marijuana use is a big one. I'm in recovery from poly substance abuse, right? But weed was definitely the most present. It was all day, every day, basically from like I don't know, call it 16 to like 25, and it was very sneaky because with a lot of stoners, right? Like we never felt like we got stoned. I was like, oh, it doesn't affect me, because I was always high to some extent. But luckily, I'm generation above, I'm a millennial, so I didn't really have to deal with the dabs or the pens or any of that stuff. I was just, smoking joints, which seems very quaint now. But yeah, when you look at that, like high THC stuff, like that's like crack. I mean, that's drugs. That's like a different level. I think it's not the weed that, some of our parents might be used to or familiar with. It is a very, very high potency thing. So I know you work in Colorado, so like I imagine you see that a lot.
Oh yeah, I see definitely weed use all the time. I mean, it's 600 to 700% stronger than the stuff that me and you grew up smoking. And yeah, it has a real, a daily regular chronic use will delay and or permanently lower IQ use. There was a study in New Zealand on that. And so I try to counsel my guys, like, yeah, the less you do it, the more fun it will be. And, it's easy to get addicted to this stuff. This addiction is more insidious than other addictions in a way. I call it more like the screwdriver of addiction. Like it'll take a screw out here, take a screw out there. It's not the sledgehammer like crack or alcohol or heroin that will just completely mess up your life. It's slow and it's insidious and it can have a big effect.
Yeah, insidious is the word. It's very, very sneaky. It's very, very sneaky. And I remember working with a therapist, in college and realizing that, When I was sober, that felt like an altered state of consciousness. Like I was having feelings for the first time. I was like more aware. I was overstimulated by things. I was so used to operating while stoned that I wasn't able to deal with reality. I didn't really realize that until I started experimenting with sobriety. I'm curious if that was true for you.
It was true. I got addicted to marijuana myself. It was a big problem. The part of the insidiousness for me was I was depressed in high school. I think as a result of PTSD that I hadn't been treated, that just sort of hardened in my nervous system. And so when I discovered marijuana, I kind of likened it like the hand of God came down and said, "You are loved." And I laughed and laughed and laughed. And it kind of opened up my world and really set me up for addiction. My grades improved, the relationships with my parents improved. It lifted my depression. I got into a good college. I had great friends. I played lacrosse. And so by the time I went to college in California, where the weed was way stronger than in the suburbs of Chicago, I came back from freshman year and I was like, I have a problem. And I went to my therapist, the same one, and I said, I need some help.
Yeah, so I think you're bringing up a really good point, which is, and this is true for me too, is like it did work for a while. I think in our field, you call that like self-medicating, right? It's like we find stuff that we need in some way, shape, or form. It often comes with this poison pill, whether that's addiction or other, horrible side effects. But I guess I want to ask you, like, as a parent, how should parents talk to their kids about drug use? Because, they're, especially in the early stages, like you said, they're having fun. Maybe they're more social. Maybe they're talking to girls for the first time. Like this is like the magical elixir, they're feeling joy. They're feeling creative. So for a parent to be like, oh, this is bad, it's going to get you an addict. You're going to be a loser, whatever. I think the current party line is kids are like, you don't get it, right? Like you don't understand what I'm talking about.
Well, yeah, a lot of it is like, well, you did it, so we can do it. And it's legal now. So come on, really? It's just weed. That was a phrase that I heard when I went to drug treatment. I told a couple guys like, yeah, I'm in here for weed. And they're like, oh, don't worry, like that, you'll be fine, And my detox was horrendous. Hazelden at the time didn't understand the detox that I went through. Anyway, so how should parents talk to kids? I think that data-based, non-judgmental, certainly an understanding of the culture, that Western American culture is like, you got a problem, take a pill. Where's the quick fix? Like, there's an avoidance of, let's, dig deep into this. So yeah, I think if there seems to be an abuse issue, let's take a hard look at like, what are the underlying factors here? Let's solve this. Let's take a deep dive and understand that there's a lot of peer pressure as well.
I'm curious, kind of along that same line, when should a parent really intervene? Talking about sending the kid to rehab or to wilderness therapy, something like that. Because I see, when I was working in Boulder, and I'm similar, right? I'm very left leaning, especially if like parents have done, smoked weed in the past, they can be very permissive, right? They can be like, oh, it's fine. Like I smoked weed. It's not a problem. Like he or she will get over it, right? So I'm curious, like what signs a parent should look for when it's time to like bring down the hammer, it's time to really make a forceful change in your kid's life.
Certainly if grades suffer, that's a good indication. If the quality of the social interactions, also the quantity of the social interactions seem to suffer, I think that's important. Are they hitting the developmental milestones in reasonable fashion? Can they keep up with the demands, school, sports, clubs? Do they seem to be withdrawing? Are they, is there cross addiction with technology, video games, porn? Those a lot of times go hand in hand. And there are kids that can handle it. They can smoke, every once in a while. And I think giving some kids some parameters and be like, okay, yeah, you like to smoke weed. I get it. I did too. Like, let's just keep it like, on the weekends every once in a while. And let me know if that is hard for you. And then if it is, let's take a hard look at some interventions, formal or informal.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like when it starts to really destroy their lives, right? And it starts to really bleed into other things. Because I do believe that it is a gateway drug. It was for me, at least. I think it being legal maybe helps a little bit, to be fair. But I know for me, when it was still illegal, it's like, yeah, the guy's got weed, but he's also got all kinds of other stuff. And sometimes you just want to try some other stuff.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, nowadays it's like there's no culture around smoking weed like the way that maybe we grew up with it. It was like, oh man, you got weed? Yeah, let's go get high. Like, and we're like instant buddies. Now it's like everyone just goes to their dispensary, they go home, they get blotto, they play their video games or do whatever. And there's no like bonding around it, like it's sort of in a healthy kind of social, like counterculture way.
Yeah, I mean, I when I was really smoking my most, I was in Pittsburgh. So we'd go watch like Laser Floyd, and then just like hang out in cars in the parking lot. And it was bonding. I mean, for me, it was probably maybe similar for you. It was my first sense of belonging. I was bullied as a kid and didn't have a great high school experience, but in college, I was like, oh, I found my people. We could talk. It's probably really dumb looking back on it, but it felt like philosophy and existential and like getting really out there, getting really spaced out. And that was really enjoyable. I felt like I belonged with that.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
I want to pivot a little bit to technology, right? So you brought that up. And I think it's another thing that people and parents just do not understand. And I think it's hard. So I'm curious what you think about that because, I think on the one hand, clearly it's toxic, right? Clearly it's like creating comparison. It's creating this sense of deficit. It's creating the sense of anxiety. It's making these kids always be connected, able to turn off, never to really be kids. It's exposing them to things that are, way beyond their EQ level, right? To think about. But on the other hand, and we've had some people talk about that, it's also kind of the new social spaces, right? Like the kids aren't hanging out on their bikes, driving around the cul-de-sac anymore, like they're not hanging out in the parking lot smoking weed, listening to Laser Floyd, right? They're on Discord, they're on Call of Duty, right? They're hanging out online. So again, I think that line is really difficult. So I'm curious your thoughts on that and what you see with the Gen Z kids out there.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think there needs to be a balance struck with this is a new age. This is different. I mean, I would have been struggling with technology had I grown up in this era. And you're right, this is a way that they connect with Snapchat. A lot of the boys are playing video games, with their friends, and they're in separate spaces, mostly sometimes in the same space, but they're wired in with each other and they're playing these games. And it sounds like a blast. I never really got into video games that much, but yeah, so I think just recognize it's a different era and, you cannot put a price on face-to-face, authentic social interaction, going out to a pizza place, go riding your bike, go hiking, mountain biking, rock climbing. That stuff is invaluable.
Yeah. So I guess I'll ask you the same question, right? Like for parents, how can they educate their kids around that? Or what are some kind of rules or maybe, I don't know, modeling that they can do? Because I see parents really struggle with that.
My girlfriend, she has a 14-year-old kid, and she has not given him a smartphone yet. And he just has a dumb phone. And he carries around a tablet with him. And whenever he's bored, he reads a book. And I think it's amazing. I would say, like, delay as long as you can getting them the smartphone. It's like a supercomputer. How tempting is it to be, oh, I'm bored, I'm gonna check out some porn. Oh, I'm like, well, let's check out some like girls I could date or whatever. Like that is intoxicating. So yeah, I would say just delay the technology and encourage them to connect in some authentic manner. And if they need help with this stuff, like intervene sooner rather than later.
Yeah, a big one that I tell my parents is make reality fun, because I think a lot of parents make a mistake where they take the kid off the phone, they use it as a punishment or whatever, but then the kid is just like alone in their room, or they're doing chores around the house, or the parent takes them on something that the parent might find interesting, but the kid is not interested at all. It's like, oh yeah, let's go fishing with your dad, but the kid doesn't give a shit about fishing. So the alternative always seems worse, which means that the kid is going to keep going for the phone. But I think there's something there of like, okay, if you're going to take the phone away from your kid, make sure you're doing something that they enjoy, that you're getting into their world and you're helping them grow as a human. You know, like you got to give them some kind of guidance. And it's hard because you're competing with, like you said, these algorithms and these, you know, devices that are like hardwired into our cerebral cortex, you know, but you can figure out what your kid likes and really try to double down on that.
And I think also the parents are addicted to phones and they model this behavior for their kids. I mean, I had like a family come in and we're talking, and the father just pulls out his phone during the session. He's just like, and I'm like, yeah, well, this is like a no phone space. So if you could put that away. He's like, well, I have really important work to do, and I'm just like, okay, well, I see, where a lot of this behavior is coming from. I mean, we're on our phones all the time. Kids look to us and they want to be like adults.
They reran some of the like Bowlby like attachment experiments, right? Where they would, videotape for the listeners, right? They would like videotape, a caregiver and their kid. And basically they're watching how the kid responds to the caregiver leaving the room and coming back to the room, right? But they've rerun them with the phone. So instead of the caregiver leaving the room, the caregiver pulls out the phone and is on the phone. And it's wild because you get the exact same reaction, right? So a kid can feel as abandoned as if you were to literally physically leave the room when you open up your phone and you're like watching it, right? And you can see these micro expressions where, the mom pulls out the phone and the kid visibly gets upset and distressed. And over time, they're learning that the phone is a higher priority to their caregiver than they are, which is pretty fucked up. I mean, you think about it, right? But I see that happen, right? You can be playing with your kid, and if your phone buzzes, you stop playing with the kid and you pick up the phone, right? You're doing that like micro messaging constantly over and over and over again, and your kid's picking up on that.
Yeah, that's disturbing for sure. Yeah. The message is whatever happens on the phone takes precedent over you.
Yeah. So no wonder the kids like want the phone because like, oh, well, if it's more important than me, this must be the best shit ever. Like this thing must be incredible if it's like more important than playing with your own child.
The kid and the parent are in the same house. I know how to get mom's attention. I text her.
It's wild out there, man. It's like, it's a very different world. So you talked about, I guess kind of threading on technology. Let's talk about the comparison thing, because I see that also really wrecking Gen Z kids when it comes to social media, particularly where they're able to be exposed to, experts in everything, right? You can find like the most jacked dude. You can find the richest person. You can find the guy who's dating like 6 women, right? You can find the person who lives as digital nomad. And like, as like just a normal kid, it's like, oh my God, am I supposed to be this? Am I supposed to be this successful? Am I supposed to be this crazy? How do you?
Yeah, I go down that rabbit hole too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm supposed to, be earning 7 figures as a therapist or whatever, or I should have published or had 4 books out. So yeah, I mean, I go down the same rabbit hole, but I mean, I think the adolescent mind that's undeveloped, certainly the prefrontal cortex is undeveloped. It's easy to come to those snap judgments of, wow, I'm lesser than, I'm not smart as, I need to get buff, I need to shag a bunch of ladies or whatever, do some incredible thing to prove my worthiness, because it's not okay just to be a normal kid anymore.
You have to be famous, right? And there's so many of these channels, which I'd be so curious to interview, like one of these like influencers that are like 18 or like even 16. But I've caught whiff. There's like some of these YouTube channels where you have these kids that like seemingly like don't have parents and like live in mansions and just like buy a bunch of crazy shit and do a bunch of like pranks and stuff in the world. And it's like, what is that life? It's like Richie Rich, if you remember that old movie, right? It's like, what is that life? And I think kids are watching that and they just like go to school, have friends, hang out at home. They don't have like a jet or whatever these kids have.
Yeah, and if they can't get famous for, something that adds or contributes to society, they'll let's go out and hurt someone, or let's go pick a fight and live stream it or something.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. There's a lot of like, that like prank stuff can really quickly turn to bullying, where it's like, yeah, like let's make a scene, like let's just like take over this restaurant and like ruin everyone's day or whatever, because it'll be funny. It'll be for the likes. How common is that? Like, do you have clients that do that are kind of acting in that way of attention seeking?
Thankfully, I don't. I don't think a lot of those folks are looking for mental health help.
Fair. I don't go to therapy.
Yeah, I think they have, too much money and too much privilege and too many followers to admit they have an issue.
Yeah, they probably feel like they're invincible on some level. I would. I think that'd be like unbelievably intoxicating as a teenager. I see like thousands of people approving of what I do, no matter what. I'm also curious about like, so you have this comparison thing, right? How does it manifest for the kids then? You talked about that insecurity, but do you see that turning into things like drug use or depression, or what's the real impact? Boots on the ground. What are you seeing out there?
I think it leads to kind of giving up on some level. That I think the message is that you need to be elite. You need to be some apex at the top of your field, and most kids aren't like that, thankfully. But I think kids just give up and they want to hide out in the basement playing video games, vaping. I think social media has had a particularly negative effect on girls, and with increasing suicide rates and mental health issues. So yeah, I mean, it's toxic for sure, and it is not reflective of actual reality.
Yeah, I think I see that too, of like, if I can't win, I just don't want to compete, kind of like counting themselves out before they even start. So you get a lot of, I wonder if there's there's a new term for it, but, failure to launch is what I grew up learning that was called. But like these kids that, can't quite get going because I think they feel like they've already lost the game. So why play if I'm already at the bottom of the totem pole?
And then you add, environmental degradation, you add an insurrection at the very tops of our government. You add the current fascist, quasi-fascist, or however you want to term it, current administration. And it can seem pretty hopeless. I go down that rabbit hole sometimes too. And it's scary, especially when they've got 60 years ahead of them in their lives and they're seeing how this could play out. It's overwhelming.
Yeah, and it pivots to a little bit what you were saying in the beginning, where they look at these older male figures, right? Whether it's Donald Trump or Congress or whatever, right? And there's no role models, or the ones that they are, encourage them, to be bullies or to just kind of like be belligerent, not have honor, not have ethics.
Conflating masculinity with cruelty, brutality, and it's toxic. And young boys are they're more influenced to positive and negative role models. Boys really respond well to having a positive male role model in their life. They tend to respond a little bit better than girls. Not that it isn't important for girls, of course it is. But and then you get a dearth of teachers. Since the 80s, the amount of male teachers has been decreasing, and it all makes for kind of a sad outlook in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I agree. I think boys and men need that too, right? I think men need to be mentors to younger generation. We don't often talk enough about that, but I do believe, and I'm curious what you think about this, I do believe that masculine structure is hierarchical by nature, right? But the important thing is that it's not that you're worse for being lower on the hierarchy, right? There's still a level of respect. But these structures, whether it be the military or the apprenticeship programs from the trades, or ranks, right? Like we like levels and ranks and medals and shit like that, right? But we need that. I think as men, like if we can be humble enough to enter a hierarchy, even at the bottom, as long as there's people higher up that respect us and want us to improve, that is the best way for boys to grow. You know, they need to know that they can get better at stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I don't think we need more alpha males. I mean, we should have some. Hats off to first responders who run into a burning building, and most of those guys are men. This whole term toxic masculinity, it's kind of I don't know, it's a misnomer. I don't think genuine masculinity is toxic. We're just talking about toxic people who guise it in the form of masculinity. So yeah, I'd like to get rid of that term. I don't think it's helpful.
Yeah, I don't think it's helpful either. Yeah, I think it's just toxicity, right? I mean, bullying and dominance and control sucks no matter who is doing it, right? And I think you lose sight of what's good about masculinity, what we talk about a lot on the show, and I won't go through it because we've heard a ton, our listeners have, but it's this idea of, strength, courage, mastery, and honor. That's what we, at MTO say are our masculine values. So it's not about control and dominance, but it is about being a leader and, getting good at stuff and working from an ethical framework, right? Like you can be better at being a man. You can be a good man, but it doesn't mean that masculinity is inherently toxic.
Right. And we need that masculinity as a balance to femininity, and not that men only carry masculine traits, and women only carry feminine traits, but we need both of those traits for a healthy society.
Certainly. Yeah. It's the polarity and the, the connection and synergy between the two. Right. And I think that's hopefully where we're going. Right. Like, again, what I believe, maybe it's weirdly taboo, but I do believe that masculinity and femininity are different, but that they're equal. I think for the longest time it's been, masculinity and femininity are different, but masculinity is better. And I think that there's some argument where people are saying none of it exists, right? Everything is just a mush. But I do believe in a binary, but the binary is equal.
Yeah, more of a duality that we need to have.
Right. Yeah, balance. And it takes both. Yeah, and both can be within a person. I guess it does bring up the gender queerness thing, because I see in many ways that's Gen Z's kind of addition to the soup that is Western culture. I think for a lot of, my generation millennials, we were really open about being gay, right? Sexuality was more kind of our kind of taboo place. And, when we look at Gen X and boomers, it was kind of rejecting religion in many ways, right? Just being more secular. And Gen Z is this gender queerness thing. But I'm curious, what you see about that, what you think that's all about. I don't know how to say this. I think people ask how real is it, which is a weird way to kind of judge that. But I do think that is maybe the biggest question mark when the older generation are looking at Gen Z. They're I don't understand this whole thing. It's very, very new.
Well, in a sense, it's not new. I mean, ancient Greek, Roman cultures in the Middle East, in gender fluidity and sexuality was fluid, and it was accepted, and it was revered, I think, in some cultures. And it was only sort of in kind of modern Judeo-Christian times when it was sort of rebranded as the heterosexual is the only sort of God sanctified way to be. So, and I think all of this repression for hundreds of years, I think it's sprouted, during COVID, and I think it came back with a vengeance. And I think it became, and many of it, most of it, I think it was authentic and helpful. But I also think it was somewhat reactionary, and there was definitely some inauthentic gender reorienting going on. I mean, I can just speak from a couple of experiences. One was a father who had a son who had top surgery, hormones, and then after it was all done, the kid was like, "What have I done? I didn't know if I don't think I really wanted this. I was just feeling lost in my life and influenced by peers in the culture," and very sad. And then another kid was struggling with depression, and then he said, "I think I want to come out as a girl." And I was like, great, let's explore it. What? Tell me about that part of you. And for weeks we worked on giving that voice to him and having that just non-judgmental acceptance of where he's at. And eventually we arrived at he was depressed and he was looking for a peer group. And the non-binary group, they were friendly and open to him and accepting, but they also, they had some influence, some peer pressure on him too, that the normative hetero gender was in a sense also not okay in this particular peer group. And so yeah, I mean, I would just, if parents are struggling with this stuff, like, I don't know, I would say certainly I would be reluctant to do any surgeries or hormonal interventions until there has been extensive therapy. Also, wait until they've hit an age where they can make that decision on themselves. There's a psychologist out of New York City who I think was a male, became a female, and she advocated, like, if any of your kids want to gender reassign, they should be in counseling for a number of years, and that should not just be a snap decision. I mean, I'm sure it's not for most parents, certainly, but it should be thoroughly explored.
I agree with that. I think we're looking at things that are very difficult, if not irreversible, right? The surgeries or hormone treatment. It's like, there's ways to validate your child and to let them, dress however they want or use makeup or whatever, right? I mean, that's great. That's exploration. That's nonconformity. That's rebellion. I mean, just how all of us rebelled in our own way, but I think it does get a little dicey when we're looking at things that are much more permanent. And I hear you. I mean, I work with a number of teenage boys and, especially in Boulder, maybe probably other like very liberal communities, being like a white heterosexual, like privileged, somewhat wealthy boy is like the worst. It's like the worst thing. And I've seen guys like, hopefully, they've kind of come around, but I've seen them really disown that identity. And that probably means taking on something else, whether that is gender queerness or trying to find some like oppressed identity or, neurodiversity, I think is another one that gets talked about a lot, right? I think like it's weirdly in some circles, it's like very threatening just to be like normal. Or just to be that white heterosexual male. It's not interesting, or you're seen as like an oppressor, right? You're seen as like the problem out there in the world.
Yeah, that's an interesting segue into just why a lot of men kind of abandoned ship on the Democratic Party and went to the Republicans and voted for Donald Trump. Again, conflating masculinity with brutality. And yeah, it was interesting. I think Scott Galloway was talking about, like, he was looking at the DNC website and it said who we serve, and it was 52 different segments of the population, African American, Hispanic, Asian American, and so on, which is great. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't, but nowhere did it say white males or even males. We don't support males. And so that message came through loud and clear. And those kind of men got, they got seduced by the message of Donald Trump.
Yeah, I think that's true, right? It's like, yeah, they got disowned by the left and then the right just picked them up. And it's tough because it's not like, yeah, I'm curious your thoughts on this. I think there is some truth, right? I mean, I think like white men and more importantly, like white male institutions have caused a lot of pain in the world. However, by disowning that whole group and choosing not to like work with them, if you think there's a problem, the idea is that you should work with them and try to help them, right? Rather than making them the enemy. But I think that really did happen, during COVID and probably a little bit before COVID as well, where the white male was just like demonized and was the problem everywhere,
Yeah. And, for some good reasons, but also, I like to say, what's the most dangerous animal on this planet? If it's a young male who doesn't have any prospects for a future or potential mates or can earn a decent living. And you look at some of the most unstable cultures on this planet, and it's full of displaced, disowned young males who become radicalized and militarized in many cases.
Certainly. Yeah. Because I think at the, deep down, we just want to belong, right? I think we want to be part of something greater than ourselves, even if that's something like a gang or a, militia. I think we want to feel strong, you know, I think we want to feel respected. And if we're not feeling that at home, we're going to find it. Whether you like it or not, we're going to find it.
Yeah, their purpose is to subjugate others. That's better than being, completely displaced, sadly.
I'm curious in your view, because I think we're chatting about it, and I think it's certainly informed by gender queerness. What would you say the modern male is? You know, what's your definition of what it means to be a good man in 2025? Because, you know, these old models certainly are not working. And I think there's also some new models that are way too loosey-goosey that men just, kind of push away.
Yeah, I mean, the right would say we got to turn back the clock 50, 60 years and be sort of more heteronormative, and women need to find their place, barefoot in the kitchen again. And then the left would say, men need to become more like their sisters or their mothers, and masculinity is not something that's attractive at all. So yeah, the modern version, I think, is to embrace masculinity and femininity, to revere both, to identify and own both of those traits within each of all of us to varying degrees. And the modern male, I like how Scott Galloway put it, like is a protector, takes chances in a way that doesn't harm others. It also leaves kind of a surplus, I think, of, as he put it, like doing something and not expecting anything in return. And yeah, kindness, compassion, understanding, being able to have a certain amount of emotional intelligence and talk about our feelings, but also, knowing what we want and going for it, and certainly not in a way that harms anyone else.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And what I'm hearing is, and I agree, it's like, I don't want men to disown their maleness, like the part that is risk taking, the part that we are frontiersmen, that we want to protect the people that we love. Like, these are beautiful, beautiful, and very, very important things that I think, like, we try to disown, or because they're so wrapped up often in violence and dominance and control. But there is such a better way to do it. It's about being a protector versus being an aggressor, right? Or being like a provider versus being greedy, right? I think there's ways that we can show up and have a place in society without having this violence and without counting ourselves out. I just hope our listeners don't count themselves out, because I know I did for a while. And it's, I think it's time for us to step up and start being proud to be a man, and knowing that we have a place and that we have a role, and that role is changing, but it is still a very important one.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think we sort of need the equivalent to what the women's lib feminist movement has done. I think like a masculine liberation from this old model of, stiff upper lip, kind of madman type of hard drinker with womanizing.
Yeah, because I mean that's a man box, right? And you said the Republicans want to turn back turn it back 50 years, which I think is true. I like turning it back a couple thousand years, because if you look at men, if you look at like the Knights of the Round Table, right, or if you look at like samurai, right, they had this balance of masculine and feminine. You have a samurai who like could cut you in half with one katana strike, but also is writing haikus and appreciating like dewdrop on a leaf, right? I mean, they did really this ideal, the masculine ideal included the feminine, right? Included like the lover archetype. It included a spiritual root. It included kind of presence and ethics and honor. It wasn't just about killing everybody and dominating the world. It was doing things for the right reason. And I feel like we've lost that. I'm secular myself, but I think when we lost religion as a country, in many ways we lost that ethic, and we need to rebuild that, in a way that is more accessible, is more secular. But I feel like we're in this weird transition period where honor and ethics and just like being a good person is punk rock. If you watch the Superman movie, right? Like it's punk rock to like be kind, which is, it's wild.
Amen, brother. Yeah, sadly that's the case. But I hold out hope, and I think that there's awareness about this, and there's good work being done in therapy with men's groups. There's some positive voices out there. Richard Reeves, he wrote a book of Men and Boys, and just amazing research and just gleaning such sad statistics on the plight of young men, particularly brown and Black young men aren't doing well. And I think definitely some public policy needs to be focused on that.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a really great book. Recommend to a lot of our readers. We'll put a link to that in the show notes, but it's a great just like primer. And I think if you are on the fence of thinking if any of this shit is real, that book will convince you that it's very real, that this crisis of masculinity is real. It is happening. And yeah, he talks a lot about, fatherless homes, a lot about gang violence, a lot about drug addiction. One of his policy is the idea of actually redshirting all boys, like holding all boys back a year, because we do take a while to develop, especially social skills, So there's a few really awesome policies in there that hopefully somebody reads, and hopefully get implemented. Or there's some things that you can implement in your own home as a family, right? You don't have to wait for the government to make that decision. I think there's some decisions you can make as a family to help support the boys in your life.
Yeah, I mean, I was held back in 5th grade, and it really did wonders for me. I mean, I was a slow developer already. I mean, on average, boys are going to go through puberty a year later than girls, and puberty kickstarts a lot of that prefrontal cortex development, executive functioning development, being organized, getting your assignments completing, handing them in. It can be really difficult for a lot of young men.
Absolutely. So as we're kind of ending this show, I'm curious, in your mind, what are some common misconceptions about the younger generation that you feel like don't get talked about enough? What are some shadow pieces or things that are more, I don't know, maybe overlooked?
I think the younger generation has a wisdom that I haven't seen. And in a long time, I think they are privy to, reams of information that I didn't have access to. And I see them. Yeah, they have a wisdom and about how things work, and they understand the value of kindness and being careful with their words and how they treat people. Certainly in a face-to-face level, I think, sometimes with technology, it kind of dehumanizes people. It just has that effect. But yeah, I just see a wisdom and a sensitivity that heartens me.
I see that too. I think their emotional literacy is so far and beyond any generation at this age. I think they're able to speak about their emotions in a way. I think they still overwhelm them and they struggle to act on them, but I think they have like the awareness that I know I certainly did not have when I was that age.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I also work with some baby boomers, and what I hear regularly is, oh, my wife says I'm sensitive, or my husband says I'm sensitive, as if it's a bad thing. And then the younger kids come in, they're like, yeah, I'm sensitive. And that's an attribute. And there's just a different cultural reference there.
Yeah. I mean, they could pick up on vibes, right? I mean, some of them are like almost have like a sixth sense in a way, where they're tuning into energetic differences in a room, right? Or they're tuning into if something feels safe or doesn't feel safe. I mean, these are conversations that I was not even aware of until I, did therapy school for 3 years, right? I didn't even know how to even talk about that type of feeling.
Yeah, definitely. And they're going through, I mean, we haven't seen technology changes like this. It's mind bending and backbreaking how quickly things are evolving. And then you throw in AI, which we didn't even touch on. I mean, these kids are like wondering like what kind of jobs are even going to be viable.
Who knows? Yeah, I mean, it's a very different world out there. Well, so we do have to towards the end. Maybe we'll have you back and talk about AI and the impact it has on our generation and certainly on our field as well. But Peter, really enjoyed having you on the show. If people want to learn more about you and the work that you do, where can they find you online?
peterlear.net. That's my website. And I'm in private practice in Boulder, and I see teens and adults deal with a lot of trauma, addiction, attachment issues, and just garden variety mental health stuff.
Great. Well, thank you again for coming on the show.
All right. Thanks, Mark, for having me.
And listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this podcast, do all the social stuff, like, share, subscribe. You know what to do by now. Send it to a teenager that maybe needs to hear this, or a parent that needs to learn about their teenager. I think there's a lot of great wisdom and knowledge and tips in this show that can be very helpful for them. As you know, Men's Therapy Podcast is part of Men's Therapy Online. You can find all of our stuff at menstherapy.online. We have individual couples and groups. We have a team of therapists that are ready and willing to work with you, work with your son, work with your father, whoever. If you're a dude and you want to talk about this kind of stuff, we got your back. So check us out. We're at menstherapy.online. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week, another episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast.